From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
The longer we wait, the more dangerous he becomes.
Mr. Bond, aye. Mr. Bro, aye. Mr. Brownback, aye. Mr. Bunny, aye. Mr. Byrne, aye. Mr. Campbell, aye. Ms. Cantwell, Mrs. Carnahan, Mr. Carper, aye.
Wait! Slow down. Don't rush this through.
Today, Body of War, the true story of an anti-war hero.
I called my recruiter on September 13th. I wanted to go to Afghanistan, and I only managed to spend maybe 5 days in Iraq until I got picked to go on my first mission. There were 25 of us crammed into a back of a 2.5-ton truck with no covering on top or armor on the sides. For the Iraqis on the top of the roof, it just looked like, you know, ducks in a barrel. Yeah. They didn't even have to aim.
Today, we'll be joined by Thomas Young, paralyzed in Iraq, and with filmmakers Ellen Spiro and Phil Donahue. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The New York Times is reporting it now appears President Bush will keep 140,000 troops in Iraq for the rest of his term. On Monday, General David Petraeus and Ambassador Ryan Crocker recommended Bush put off making any decisions on troop reductions until at least August or September. Petraeus and Crocker are scheduled to testify on Capitol Hill in 2 weeks, exactly 5 years after the so-called fall of Baghdad. Vigils were held across the country Monday to mark the 4,000th death of a U.S. soldier in Iraq since the 2003 invasion. At the White House, President Bush said the outcome of the war will, quote, merit the sacrifice of the 4,000 soldiers killed so far.
I guess my one thought I want to leave with those who still hurt is that, you know, one day people will look back at this moment in history and say, thank God they were courageous people willing to serve, because they laid the foundations for peace for generations to come.
In an interview on ABC News, Vice President Dick Cheney was also asked about the 4,000 soldiers killed in Iraq.
The president carries the biggest burden, obviously. He's the one who has to make the decision to commit young Americans. But we are fortunate to have a group of men and women, all volunteer force, who voluntarily put on the uniform and go in harm's way for the rest of us.
97% of the deaths of U.S. soldiers have occurred after President Bush announced the end of major combat operations in Iraq May 1st, 2003. Heavy fighting erupted earlier today in the southern Iraq oil city of Basra as Iraqi security forces launched a major operation against rival Shia militias. The fighting could lead to the end of a 7-month-old ceasefire by Muqtada Sadr's Mahdi army. Earlier today, an official with Sadr's headquarters reportedly ordered Mahdi army field commanders to go on high alert and prepare to strike the occupiers and their Iraqi allies. The ceasefire by Sadr's Mahdi army has been seen as a major factor behind the recent drop in violence in Iraq. Basra is Iraq's second-largest city and Iraq's gateway to the Gulf. Its oil fields are the source of most government revenues. The military operation was launched after Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki visited Basra and vowed to reimpose his government's control over the city. Supporters of Sadr have also launched a nationwide civil disobedience campaign to protest raids and detentions. They're demanding the government release detainees, stop targeting Sadrist members, and apologize to the families and the tribal sheikhs of the men. Human rights demonstrators breached tight security and tried to hijack the Beijing Olympic torch lighting ceremony in ancient Olympia, Greece, Monday. Just before the torch was lit, 3 demonstrators managed to break a tight police cordon. Police arrested 9 protesters, including members of Reporters Without Borders and Students for a Free Tibet. Tibetan activist Tenzin Danji spoke to reporters as he was being dragged away.
No torch to Tibet. Shame on China. Shame on China. Don't bring China's blood-tainted torch to Tibet. Free Tibet. Tibet is an independent country. China is the oppressor. The Chinese government has no shame, and the Chinese government is oppressing me even in a free country. The Chinese government is spreading its oppression and dictatorship like cancer around the world.
The globally televised ceremony launched a 5-month torch relay that culminates with the opening of the 2008 Olympics in Beijing. On Monday, Jacques Rogy, the president of the International Olympic Committee, defended the decision to hold the Summer Games in China.
It was right to award the Games to China for 2 reasons. One is that we cannot deny 1/5 of mankind of the advantages of Olympism and the Olympic Games. It's just not fair to do that. And secondly, we believe that the Games are a great catalyst for change for China itself. The Games will open up China to the scrutiny of the world, thanks to the 25,000 media being present.
Meanwhile, the Tibetan government in exile says the death toll from the demonstrations in Tibet has now reached about 140. In Pakistan, a close associate of the assassinated opposition leader Benazir Bhutto has been sworn in as Pakistan's new prime minister. Yusuf Raza Gilani took the oath today from the Pakistani President General Pervez Musharraf. Moments after he was sworn in, his supporters began chanting, "Long live Bhutto." Gilani heads a coalition government that won elections in February against the U.S.-backed Musharraf. In his first move as prime minister, Gilani ordered the release of senior judges who'd been placed under house arrest by Musharraf last year. On Monday, former Chief Justice Iftikhar Chowdhury spoke to reporters.
On behalf of myself and all those judges who were illegally and unconstitutionally detained in their houses on November 3rd, I thank all of you and the entire nation.
Iftikhar Chowdhury had been under house arrest since November. Gilani also said he would seek a formal UN investigation into the assassination of Benazir Bhutto. 2 top U.S. officials, Deputy Secretary of State John Negroponte and Assistant Secretary of State Richard Boucher, have already arrived in Pakistan to meet with Pakistan's new prime minister. In economic news, American households are spending a bigger chunk of their income on food, energy, and medical care than at any time since records were first kept in 1960. According to Merrill Lynch, 36% of disposable income is now spent on these expenses. Meanwhile, in another sign of the worsening economy, the number of residents in Ohio receiving food stamps has almost doubled since 2001. A record 1.1 million Ohioans now receive food stamps. That's nearly 10% of the state's population. In campaign news, Senator Hillary Clinton has admitted she misspoke when she claimed to have run across a tarmac to avoid sniper fire after landing in Bosnia as First Lady in 1996. Clinton gave a vivid description of the incident earlier this month, claiming she was sent to Bosnia because it was too dangerous for the president. Clinton was forced to admit she misspoke after CBS News showed footage of her casually walking across the tarmac with her daughter Chelsea. Clinton's description of coming under sniper fire was first challenged by the comedian Sinbad, who was also on the trip. Sinbad, who's endorsed Barack Obama, said the scariest part of the trip to Bosnia for him was wondering where the next meal would come from. Arab leaders are heading to Damascus Saturday for a summit organized by the Arab League. Arab League Secretary General Amr Moussa says U.S.-led peace efforts had faltered seriously since a Middle East peace summit in Annapolis, Maryland in November. Moussa also said the Arab League would continue to push for the entire Middle East to become a zone free from nuclear weapons.
The regional security requires a lot of work, and requires, in particular, the establishment of a zone free from nuclear weapons. This should apply to Israel, to Iran, to any other country in the region. This is the basic point in our policy. If the situation remains as it is, I believe that a viable security system or a viable security scheme for the region will be very difficult to achieve.
Israel remains the only country in the Middle East with nuclear weapons. In news from Latin America, Ecuador's Attorney General Alfredo Alvear says Ecuador is putting together a case that could result in bringing Colombia before an international court for carrying out a military strike inside Ecuador. On March 1st, Colombian troops killed at least 25 people at a camp in Ecuador run by the Colombian rebel group FARC. On Sunday, Colombia admitted one of the dead was an Ecuadorian man. 5 Mexican students were also killed in the attack. Meanwhile, the Interpress Service reports the U.S. military base in Manta, Ecuador, may have been used in the attack. Military and diplomatic sources told the news service the air base played a role in locating and carrying out reconnaissance of the FARC camp in Ecuador. Detroit Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick has been charged with perjury and obstruction of justice, as well as misconduct in office, for lying about a romantic relationship with his former chief of staff. If convicted, the Democratic mayor would be automatically expelled from office. In legal news, a Superior Court judge in California has ordered Starbucks to pay more than $100 million in back tips and interest to workers. The Starbucks employees filed a lawsuit because they were being forced to share their tips with supervisors in violation of California law. And the corporate watchdog group Corporate Accountability International has launched a new contest to name the most abusive corporations of 2008.